Hello class, welcome to your chapter 15 lecture where we are going to talk about professionalism and the different careers that you can have in the juvenile justice system. So our learning objectives for this lesson are to be able to explain what professionalism is and the need for it, identify why juvenile corrections is a promising career, articulate why an internship in juvenile justice makes sense to a student interested in juvenile corrections, describe the changing face of juvenile justice, and describe what juvenile justice will look like in the years to come. So first we're going to start off with professionalism. And there's a number of factors that go into what professionalism actually is. But I'm going to tell you, I personally feel like the biggest factor here is integrity. And integrity is simply acting the way you know you should, even when no one is looking, doing the right thing, having that much self-worth and dignity that you are not going to allow, even when no one's looking, that you're not going to allow your work ethic, you're not going to allow the way you treat people to change just because someone's not looking. So it's treating others with dignity and respect and really being able to model that positive behavior. Because remember, you're working with juveniles who and their families, and these juveniles are looking to you as not just someone in authority, but you should be able to be a role model for that child. You always need to be committed to the learning model. There is always something new to learn. There is always something that you don't know, and you have to be committed to this learning model in order to really best serve juveniles. You need to be constantly learning, what the best treatments are, what the best services are, how you can better serve the juveniles in the system. You also need to believe that it's possible to make a difference, because if you come into these jobs and you think that juveniles cannot be rehabilitated and that there's really just no hope for them, this is not the job for you. You will get burnt out very quickly and quickly be overwhelmed with what the job expects. It's very important to keep your personal life at home. And I would say just as equally important is to keep work at work, because it can be very easy to take these cases home with you, to think about them, to, if you have a disposition hearing coming up, to think about, wow, what's really best for this kid. And you can lie there awake some nights like I used to do thinking about that. So it's very important that you have a separation. And keeping personal life at home really is just to not let what's going on at home impact the way that you're treating the children. If you had a really tough morning, you don't want to bring that into your job during the day, because these kids are going to test you and you're going to need all the patience that you can get some days. There also needs to be this idea that you want to have a clean institution if you're working in an institutional setting, and having sort of this, attention to detail, being able to stress accountability and follow a schedule. Because if you tell a juvenile that you're going to show up for a home visit, it's very important that you stay true to your word and you follow through with that, because it goes back to modeling positive behavior for that juvenile, that they know when you say you're going to do something, one, that you're going to do it, and also that they have this expectation from you that's met. You can keep them on track. You need to stay positive and always make sure that you refuse to accept unethical behavior from your coworkers. It can be very easy for people to, talk about the families that you deal with in certain ways after you've been doing the job for a while. It can be very easy for people to just get wrapped up in themselves in these jobs. And it's really important that you hold each other accountable in these positions. And it's also just creating a safe, healthy, and harassment-free workplace. Just making sure that, again, going back to, I think everything just goes back to integrity and treating people with respect and dignity. So the 1970s American Correctional Association Commission on Accreditation actually established training standards that ensures uniformity for those in the corrections, in juvenile corrections. So for probation officers, you need 120 pre-service hours. So that's sort of on-the-job training that you're going to get before you actually start with a caseload. And then 40 annual hours of continuous training. Now, typically the department will offer a lot of in-house trainings to get the majority of those hours done, but you can attend things such as the American Probation and Parole Association's annual conferences. There's a lot of other organizations out there that'll put on different trainings that you can look for. Some of the areas that we could see improvement in is developing a greater clarity of purpose for the correctional organizations. So understanding what exactly is our purpose with these juveniles and really gearing the service that we're delivering to that purpose. The accreditation of community-based and institutional facilities. Just accreditation would just give the juvenile, their parents, and the organizations that are working with them the reassurance that this institution or this community-based program is doing what it says it's supposed to do. Setting a national set of principles and a philosophy on the acceptable treatment of facility residents. So how should juveniles be treated when they're in a facility? It would be nice to have a national set of standards, as well as discouraging training schools from turning into juvenile prisons. I will say we don't see that so much in Pennsylvania. You have a couple that may seem a little bit more prison-like, but I would say they're more like a dormitory style where there's like a common area and then they each have their own rooms. Maintaining professionalism through new staff hires, and the continued use of rehabilitative programs. I'll say I think we do a pretty fair job at using rehabilitative programs that we know are going to work. Even having this residential culture that sanctions abuse and mistreatment of youth, so not just trying to cover up when staff do something wrong, but making sure those individuals are sanctioned. And having carefully supervised use of restraints on juveniles. Also making sure that salaries are revised periodically. I will say in Pennsylvania, a lot of counties just went through a salary study because there is a huge discrepancy in the pay from one department to another among counties, and it can be very drastic. I can tell you, for example, I am doing the exact same, for the most part, the exact same job. I was a quality assurance supervisor with another county, and I switched counties to move to the adult supervision side just for a little bit of a challenge for myself, and the opportunity came up, and it was a $30,000 difference in pay per year just to switch counties and do a slightly different job on the adult side instead of the juvenile. So, being able to revise these salaries periodically ensures that counties are being competitive and getting really good staff in there. Because if staff don't feel like they're being appreciated and paid well, it's really going to reflect in the work that they do. Also having correction and termination by administrative staff when employees are going against the conduct of what they should be doing. So for any employee misconduct. And then having private companies maintaining standards for county and state corrections. So even if it's a private company or service provider, making sure that they're still following the same standards that the government corrections organizations have to follow. So what are some of the different careers that you could look into in juvenile justice and juvenile corrections? First would be a police department. So some departments will have a specific juvenile unit, or they will have a juvenile detective, or say one officer that's assigned to all of the juvenile crimes. You could become a school resource officer, or even experience a gang detail within the police department. You may even give presentations in school settings through DARE or GREAT, even just as a regular officer, to engage with the juveniles. As far as the courts go, you could become a prosecutor or a defense attorney. You could even become a court referee or a judge. And I will say that, we talked in an earlier chapter, so most counties will have defense attorneys and prosecutors who are solely assigned to juvenile cases, to do juvenile work. And it really is because, again, the work is so specific and specialized that you have to understand all of the laws and the caveats that come along with the corrections of juvenile offenders. So you could look into that, as well as Some counties and organizations have just, or courts rather, have one judge that's assigned to all juvenile cases, or even a court referee or, say, a hearing master. As far as community-based corrections goes, there's probation and aftercare officers. And again, this is going to look different depending on the state that you're in. So in Pennsylvania, there's no difference between a probation and an aftercare officer. You're considered a probation officer and you just handle cases throughout the entirety of them being with the juvenile justice system, whether that's in placement or in the community or re-entering the community from placement. You could be a drug court counselor or a community correctional treatment specialist. You could work in a residential center as a counselor or even a director of court services or a director of a residential facility. You could work in a detention facility or a shelter facility or even in these group homes as cottage parents. There's so many different options to work with juveniles in the community-based corrections arena. So in some correctional institutions, then, you could be a social worker, you could be a clinical psychiatrist or a psychologist. They also need teachers and teachers of just regular courses as well as vocational teachers. You could become a chaplain or even like a recreational therapist or just a youth counselor. There's so many options, again, to work with youth in different capacities. To be honest, almost any job that you would choose that you'd want to do, even in like the psychology fields or the criminal justice fields, you can do that in the juvenile field and specialize in juvenile justice. So why are internships then so important? Well, you're going to receive supervised, practical, on-the-job training in that specific area. Now, some are paid, some are for college credit, and some you can actually receive both. And there is the possibility then of being hired upon graduation. So if anyone is interested, the Academy Aftercare is one community-based program that I know does internships, as well as Berks County Juvenile Probation does internships as well. So if anyone would be interested in that, please feel free to reach out to me and I can put you in touch with who you would need to be in touch with to fill out those applications. The resources that you can look into, one's called the Internship Bible or Peterson's Internships, as well as the American Correctional Association. There's some resources on different internships that you can look into. Some of them may require a background check, and it's also important to start your search early because oftentimes there's very few spots available at each place during the semester. And I cannot stress this enough, networking. While you certainly have to have the education, knowledge, and experience behind you to support you going into a position that you're going to apply for, whether that's an internship or a job, it is so important to know people who can support you in that journey, who can put you in touch with the right people. I can tell you I got my start in juvenile probation because of a job that I had, and one of the lieutenants when I was a court investigator, one of the lieutenants of the detective bureau was close with the chief in the juvenile probation department. So he was able to call up and see if they were hiring and put in a word for me. Then when I got into the teaching world, I was on a committee with the chair of a criminal justice department of a university. And I just happened to mention, hey, I just graduated with my doctorate. I'd be really interested in teaching. If you have any opportunities, come up. And he gave me my first opportunity to teach as an adjunct. So you never know who you're going to meet who may be able to help you out later down the line. So always networking and not being afraid to ask people for opportunities or if they know of any opportunities that are available. So what are some of the changes that we've seen in juvenile justice? Well, we've seen an increased use of technology to monitor probation, aftercare, and even institutional populations. So using increased security. So what this does is it increases security, reduces human interaction, and sometimes can then have an adverse impact on the individual while they're trying to re-enter. So they're so used to being supervised 24/7. Sometimes it's hard when they come out then and are back home and don't have that same supervision and structure to keep up with those appropriate behaviors. But it also reduces that human interaction because if you have a youth on the ankle monitor on GPS, maybe you don't feel like you have to go out and see them as frequently because you see where they are, you know where they are. We've also seen an expanding use of restorative justice programs and using evidence-based principles and rehabilitative approaches. And with that also comes an emphasis on reentry, and again, that continuum of care, making sure that individuals are receiving evidence-based programs that we know to work while they're in the facility and then also when they come out. So what does the future of juvenile justice look like? Well, the U.S. Census Bureau estimates that the juvenile population is going to increase 36% from 2000 until 2050. So we'll see if that comes to fruition. That many are going to come from impoverished homes headed by single mothers, which I will say we do see pretty frequently. That violence and homicide rates may grow again, like we saw in the 1980s and 90s. That adolescent psychiatry is going to be used more to treat youth with childhood problems, and we do use a fair amount of counseling services with our youth. That gangs, drugs, and guns are going to continue to be a social problem, and I can tell you that that is in fact true. That continued efforts to create uniformity and reduce discretion in juvenile sentencing will be seen, and we have seen that. That there's continued to be a deinstitutionalization movement, and that has continued, that we are trying to keep kids in the community now. That there will be an increased use of drug courts, teen courts, and maybe even gun courts. I haven't seen that so much in Pennsylvania, but I'm sure it's possible and is out there. That there's a use of restorative justice practices and using private programs to treat these juveniles. Having an increased mechanism to transfer youth to the adult court, which we have not seen. We've actually seen a very sharp decrease in the number of youth that are being transferred to the adult system. But that disproportionate minority confinement will unfortunately remain a problem. So in sum, professionalism really maintains integrity, treats youth with dignity and respect, and believes that a difference can be made. Juvenile justice careers typically are going to offer advancement, a fair salary, and benefits, as well as pensions, because a number of them are considered either county, state, or federal jobs. So they're government jobs, and they typically have really good health care and benefits that go along with the salary. Career fields can include the police, community-based, correctional institutions, as well as the courts. And correctional internships are going to provide that hands-on experience, as well as the opportunity to network with individuals currently working in the field, and then potential job opportunities after graduation. Juvenile justice does increasingly utilize technology, restorative justice practices, and evidence-based practices, while also emphasizing reentry and reentry efforts. The future of juvenile justice may see an increased juvenile population and many of the same issues that are plaguing the field today. This was your final chapter 15 lecture, and if there is ever anything I can do to put you in touch with someone who's in a field or in a career that you think you may be interested in juvenile justice or the criminal justice field, please don't ever hesitate to reach out. If I can put you in touch with that person to learn more about the job or even to potentially give you some job opportunities, I would absolutely be happy to do that. So thank you for sticking with us this semester, and I hope that everyone has a great week.